So we're talking about imperialism and how imperialist aggression is not capitalism, and capitalism can't work if you have one large imperialist aggressor consume the lion's share of the world's resources and demand that the rest of the world isn't doing enough to serve them. It, anyone who's comfortable with their place in such an order is um is counterproductive to their own individual interests of their countrymen, and yet it's true that people have a right to develop their own sovereign wealth, and it's true that commerce and trade have to happen and largely along conventional lines. But if you look within one society that's completely riven by class differences, then you see that there's a need for reform and a broader sense of egalitarianism. Um, you know, I don't think that the elder elements of any society should coerce the youth elements of any society into a war or control how they think or control their conduct beyond protecting the human rights of others. Other people don't agree. Um, I don't like the idea of hierarchy. I don't like the idea of hegemony. And I don't like the idea of inequality. No matter how it's structured, no matter what society you're in, even communist society. Because a communist society obviously is controlled by people of one age group and level of establishment in their careers, and the people of a lesser establishment, they will do the bidding of the leaders. In a capitalist and corporatist society, it's the same, except that equal to age, or controlling for age, other things equal, the rich are disproportionately ranking in the leadership of the state. I don't think that a state should be the patron entity of the wealthy elites. I think that the state should serve the interests of the working class of people, not even the middle class of people. And that's, the United States has a big problem in which we have this big greedy middle class that always thinks about themselves. They just consume and consume and consume, and the corporatist market oriented leaders want to drive consumption. I so many reports that I stumbled upon in ARC, and one was from Bloomberg, and said that this the food stamps, too many people are using food stamps. It's got Walmart worried. Some of the largest corporations in America say that if something's not done to help the poor people in America, then the consumer spending might never recover. The system of capitalism has to be broken if our largest corporations are complaining that our poor people don't have enough money. And I'm not making that up. I've seen that report. Corporate executives are saying this shit. And everyone, the discourse in my country is already fraught with all sorts of issues. I used to support President Obama, but now I see him as the face of hegemony and the face of imperialism and the face of this tyranny of the old upon the young that my generation is living under right now. We come of age into a society that has told us that education is everything, only to realize that while they were instilling this dream in us, they were also setting up the entire world market for turmoil, and they will continue to use their political wherewithal to mortgage our futures. They think that they always say that our futures are under duress. Our futures are what they fight for. But the greed that they've encouraged in prior market cycles, it states otherwise. That consumptive greed that left nothing behind for us and our own prosperity for the future. Our country is a country of extreme subsidized property ownership. We call ourselves homeowners. We say 2/3 of Americans own property. I always tell the Chinese, well, 2/3 of Americans own property. So this isn't a big, it's not really a big issue when young people don't spurn each other's love advances because one does or doesn't own property, because, a great many of us come from a property owning family. But I talked to some Europeans and they said, what do you mean own? That's how many that are mortgage? I said, well, most of them. They said, that's not own. That's not own. They don't own anything. It's the bank owns it. And I said, you know what? You're exactly right. You're correct. And then I explained, it's a class distinction. Those who own free and clear, as my mom pointed out, they're mostly senior citizens. And so the value of their investment and the value of their income, it doesn't really say much about them. Then the other cohort of a mortgage, some are not burdened at all and are getting residential growth. Others are severely burdened owner-occupiers. And then you have the renters. Even though every major city in America has an elite urban bourgeoisie that prefers mobility, people like me, years after I'm capable of owning property, I always thought I would own property young. But now I like living all over the world. I like getting a new place every few months. I never settle down. I'm nomadic, and my whole career path has dictated that I'm going to be nomadic for the rest of my life, probably. That's fine. I don't think I'll live very long. And so, I explained the stratification, that the distinction still makes sense to say that the owners are actually owning, but it's not outside of American society. The concept is obtuse. It's a bit opaque that we view ourselves this way, because the cleavage between an owning class and a renting class has to be determined. But really, if you think about that, that's the bribe. That's a bribe from the capitalist society. Create a dream of ownership. Use the finance apparatus to give people a stake in the market system. And when they have that stake in the market system, they want to protect what they own. All American people want to protect what they own. All American people who own nothing or little want to own more. It's the gospel of wealth that our society holds so dear. You look at the poorest people in the ghettos all over the country. They want money. They want to get rich. Every little penny that passes through their hand, they'll spend. The social benefits they get from the government aren't used wisely by all of them. It's tragic. I won't stereotype. I want these social benefits to be there. But, there's been a cultural wound. A cultural wound is being created by this consumerism that feeds... we can have capitalism, that's fine. But the idea of you work a low-wage job because the promise of education has been withheld from you for class reasons. And I've witnessed that. And as you work as a degraded worker, you have no representation. You have no union. Your political leaders in your state don't want to grant you basic freedoms like rights to privacy or family planning or abortions. The government is so reactionary in the South. They will say that you have a right to work, but then they will say that if you don't work 40 hours a week, that you're not a full-time employee. So then the company will pay you 35 hours a week. And then there's the Herman Cain restaurant loophole. Herman Cain is a traitor to the race of black people and also to all Americans who work. And especially people who work in restaurants. There's a restaurant loophole. They don't pay minimum wages. They collect their tips, and if their tips don't make it to the minimum level of the minimum wage, then only then will their corporate employer compensate them the difference. So it's like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, because on the one hand, these people are all so poor that they get tax credits. They don't pay into our tax system. They don't make enough money. America, as capitalist as it is, we have a progressive taxation system, which means that the lowest income people receive money back from the government all the time. And that the wealthiest Americans, millionaires and billionaires, they pay the lion's share of the taxes. They pay 35%. I think Obama wants it to be 38%. And the left in America, the incompetent and impotent American left thinks that a marginal tax increase on only the rich is going to solve our nation, solve every problem. As someone who is a leftist, maybe it's a good place to start, higher taxes on the rich, but the rich control the media. So they will always make it seem like our economy will have a death knell if we don't force more, if we do anything to take money that they squirrel away. If you understand capitalism, you understand an economy like the United States is driven by consumption. And so the federal government is more effective at consumption than wealthy Americans. Wealthy Americans look for investment vehicles for their money. More and more increasingly lately, they've been offshoring that. If we tax them more, the federal government will spend the money by putting it back into private hands. Government spending exclusively, almost 99.5%, is exclusively payments to the private sector. So these people who hate government spending so much, government spending keeps the private sector economy going. So what do you want? You people want laissez-faire capitalism, and you want there to be no public sector, and you want there to be no private sector that depends on the public sector. I can't get into all the different ways that the private sector leeches on the public sector. I'm only going to say that because the private sector employs more workers than the public sector, we need those leeches. We need the private sector to prosper. And you tell me that the private sector is impervious to a decrease in government spending? That's bullshit. I don't think government spending should be out of control all of the time. But, I think that the government needs to think of creative sources for revenue. And when people own property, when property is in private hands, and when one class of people can invest and make their money grow and maintain their investments well and invest overseas with as much facility as they can invest in domestic resources in their own country, that gives we as Americans have a dependency now on foreign capital investment. Foreign capital wants to come into our country because we don't have enough sovereign capital willing to invest in our country. So we're becoming like a developing country in that regard. That's one. Two is the foreign capital is that the situation